In this video, I'll be making a dismantleable dinosaur baby play gym as a Christmas gift for my niece Tabitha. Stay tuned until the end to see if she likes it. I'm going to be using beech for this build. I have quite a few slabs of beech and this is a very commonly used wood for baby toys as it's hard wearing, strong and non-toxic. I chose a slab that was about 25mm thick, and I chose this board because it had a large dead knot in the middle of the board, and I'm going to be cutting it into small pieces and I can cut the bad bits away, so it's a good way to make use of this board. Like most projects, this one began at the table saw. First I ripped a straight edge onto it and then I cut 4 pieces for what would make up the legs of the frame of the baby gym. I ran those through the thickness planer to clean up the grain. I didn't need to surface plane these first because the wood was good and straight enough already for how I'm going to be using it, and here's how they looked all cleaned up. And then I cut them to length at the miter saw using a stop block to get consistent lengths. I found the centre and then used a compass to mark up a round on both ends of the legs. And I cut away some of that material at the bandsaw and then I refined the shape at the disc sander. By the way, I'll be doing a review video about this sander very soon, so make sure you subscribe and click the notification bell if you want to see that. Next I set up my router table, and this is a tool that I don't think I've ever used in a video on my channel, even though I've had it for about 4 years, and that's mainly because router tables scare me a bit. I fitted a roundover bit and I can use that to soften all of the edges of the legs, making them baby safe with no chance for them to splinter. Next, I thickness planed more of the wood so that I could start making the dinosaurs themselves. Here I'm sketching out a shape, and I'm no artist, so I just googled pictures of cartoon dinosaurs and then tried to replicate the shapes of the ones I liked. This one I believe is a Diplodocus, and after tweaking the drawing a few times I had a shape I was happy with and I cut that out at the bandsaw. My bandsaw blade was really struggling. I've had the same one on there now for about a year and I recently accidentally cut through a nail. And unfortunately I only had a 12mm thick blade, which isn't ideal for what I'm doing here, but I needed to work with what I had here. Next up is probably the most well-known dinosaur, a Tyrannosaurus Rex. I had to make his belly extra plump for reasons which will become apparent later. And then finally a Stegosaurus, which has all these things called dermal plates on its back. I had to look that up to find out what they were called. Again, the 12mm blade here isn't ideal, so I had to make loads of relief cuts to nibble away the material. Next I'm going to be using a hole saw bit to drill out the middle of each of the dinosaurs, hence the plump bellies. I marked up the centre by eye with an awl, and that allowed me to position the pilot drill bit where I wanted it. Once the pilot hole had gone all of the way through, I could then flip them over and drill from the other side to give me a nice clean hole with no grain tear out. Then I can round over the edges, taking it pretty slowly because again, I'm terrified of this thing. And then I sanded the edges, which was really stupid because I should have done this first before rounding over the edges. That would have given me a much cleaner result, but clearly I wasn't thinking straight. I'm just making sure that there are no sharp edges. I want everything to be really smooth. I did the rest of the sanding in a variety of ways, some by hand, some using my electric belt file held in the vise, which is a trick I really like to use. This tool is such a handy thing to have, especially when you want to sand with a loose belt without that metal platen behind it. And I also did some with some sandpaper wrapped around a pencil. There was an awful lot of sanding on this project. Next I want to add some of this 8mm dowel, and I want to insert it right into basically the bum hole of each dinosaur. I made some pencil marks to help guide my drilling, and then started with a 4mm bit as a pilot just to keep me on track. Looks painful, doesn't it? And that went pretty well, so then I moved up to the 8mm bit to finish the hole. I could then glue in the dowel and add some of these beads, and I'll show you how I made those shortly. I wipe away all the excess glue with a wet cloth, and then I can use a coping saw to cut away the excess dowel. Then it was on to more sanding, and if you told me 5 years ago when I started my YouTube channel that one day I'd be vigorously sanding a dinosaur's bum hole, I probably wouldn't have believed you, but clearly dreams really do come true. So now onto those beads. After ripping a piece of beech at the table saw, I planed it down for consistency at the planer to get it perfectly square. Some of the beads I wanted to be square but with soft edges, which I did at the belt sander. Then I marked a line on my miter saw insert and cut the beads to size. I then sanded them down and drilled a hole roughly through the centre at the pillar drill, and I'm using a hand screw clamp to hold the workpiece to stop it spinning. I then widened that hole a bit just so that it'd be looser on the dowel and spin properly. As you can see, it's not very centred, but that doesn't really matter. It's still going to spin around and hopefully entertain the little one. For some of the beads I wanted to cut the corners at 45 degrees to make them octagonal. I did that with the block plane and then cut them in the same way as before at the miter saw. To add some colour to the beads, I bought some of this non-toxic acrylic paint. It came with free brushes, so I had everything I needed, and I chose the most vibrant primary colours, starting with green of course. After yet more sanding, I needed to figure out how to get the frame together, and I wanted it to be easy to assemble and dismantle for storage. First I drilled holes through the ends of the legs to accommodate a dowel, and I had a pine dowel I could use for this. I then wanted some stops so that the legs could only slide in so far at both ends. So I marked up where I wanted that stop to be, drilled a hole for some more of that 8mm dowel I used earlier, and I chucked that up in the drill so that I could round over the edges on some sandpaper. And then at the end of the dowel I wanted to add some threaded rod, so I drilled a hole for that, and then I can mix up some 2-part epoxy, which is going to help hold the rod inside. Then using more of the beech I marked up a couple of circles, and these are going to become some baby friendly knobs. I drilled out the centre enough to accommodate some of these T-nuts. I was hoping to use threaded insert nuts here, but I didn't have any on hand, but these should work fine. Of course, again, I rounded over the edges on these bits too. I'll show you how it all goes together a little bit later in the video, but first I'm going to apply finish to all of the bits, and for this I'm going to use some of this Rustin's quick dry water-based varnish, which I got on Amazon, which is toy friendly as you can see here. I'll leave a link to this and the paints in the description box below. I'm going to apply the finish using my air sprayer, and first I used one of these paper paint filters to make sure that I don't get any bits in it. I added a bit of water and stirred it up until it looked like it could be a good consistency for spraying. I threaded all of the parts onto some string, and then I could hang it up, which is going to help me spray from different angles to get a good even coverage. This worked out really well, and it's actually the first time I've ever used this spray gun, which came free with an old compressor I bought years ago. As you can see, I didn't wear a respirator here. I should have done, even though I'm outside, but I just chose to hold my breath instead. Once it was dry, then it was on to the arduous task of denibbing everything with 400 grit wet and dry paper by hand before applying a final coat of the varnish finish. I needed some cord, and I found these shoelaces in my drawer that have never been used. This should do the job just fine. First I threaded a bead on and then threaded it back on itself to create a loop, and then I tied a knot, and I could use that loop to hang it onto the dowel. And then it was just a case of adding all of the other beads, trying to keep the order of colours and shapes quite random. And then I could tie the dinosaurs on at the bottom. I'm going to be using one of these wood burning irons to add eyes to the dinosaurs. I got this in a charity shop a few years ago, and it comes with loads of different shaped brass tips. I picked this long tapered one. Once I'd added the eyes though, I felt the dinosaurs didn't look as friendly as I hoped they would, so I ended up adding some big smiles too. Then I can assemble the frame by adding the legs and threading on the knob, which locks everything in place nicely. And finally, I just needed to add a bit more of the cord to some holes that I drilled in the bottom of the legs, which will stop them spreading apart too far. So perhaps the moment you've all been waiting for, what did Tabitha think of her new toy on Christmas Day? Well, with her initial reaction, she didn't seem too impressed. But once she had awoken from her nap, she seemed to really enjoy playing with it. I had pretty much just guessed at what height to hang the dinosaurs, keeping them on the longer side so that the cords could be shortened if necessary. But it worked out to be a really nice height for her, which was lucky. I was really happy to see her reaction, once she'd woken up that is. I think she was really interested in it. It seemed to hold her attention really well too. This project was pretty fun to make, but it was very time consuming. It took me about 3 days to make, probably 22 hours, something like that. That includes the time it took me to think through and figure out a way of making the frame assembly dismantleable. But I'm pretty sure that the majority of the time on this one was spent sanding. It certainly seemed that way to me anyway. I'd never made anything for a baby before, and I had to do a fair bit of research around finishes and wood types to make sure that everything would be okay for Tabby. So this one was a bit of a learning experience, which was cool. It was also my first time spraying using an air compressor, and it's definitely something I'm going to be using more going forward because it went really well. I got a really nice finish, and it was much easier than using the electric corded spray gun that I've used in the past. The only problem is that since using it on this project, I've also used it to paint a couple of doors, and I found that while doing that, my 24-litre air compressor can't quite keep up with my spraying. I had to keep waiting for it to refill, so I probably need to start looking for a bigger compressor. I hope you enjoyed the project. Please subscribe to my channel for more weekly woodworking videos. You can also support the channel via Patreon if you'd like to receive early access to my videos, exclusive content including some house renovation projects, free plans and cut lists, and a name credit at the end of my videos. Thank you for watching.